Good afternoon, everybody. I am your esteemed host, Shomik Dutta. I am a co-founder and partner at Higher Ground Labs. I appreciate you all attending this. I am quick word about myself. I started in Democratic politics, worked on the Obama campaigns and in the White House, and have later co-founded a venture fund and accelerator for democratically aligned technology startups called Higher Ground Labs. We have 46 companies in the portfolio. I'd be delighted if you'd meet them. I'd be even more delighted if you'd reach out and say hello to me sometime so I could tell you about them. And I'm here really to introduce three really exciting guests. And before I do, I'm going to quickly share a little bit of background on Congressman Bera, who is going to deliver a taped introduction, which I'm sure go to that now.
Hi, I'm Congressman Ami Bera, and I want to thank you for allowing me to say a few words at the APAICS Technology Summit. If I think about my lifetime, when I was a kid in elementary school or high school, a device like this would have been called a calculator that allowed me to do addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Fast forward to where we are today, this device is processing like the best computers we had back in those days. The rapidity of which technology is changing our lives, from how I practice medicine to how people move around the country, to how we save for our future and save for retirement, to how we teach our kids. All of that is a big part of our everyday lives, and we don't even think about it. Now let's step forward and imagine what the future looks like. And technology and the technology revolution have the ability to help us address some of the biggest challenges that we face today, from climate change to better management of recyclables, to how we address income and wealth inequality in America. There are all these huge opportunities. I also should give a shout out as a native, lifelong Californian. I'm proud of the innovation that it was come out of the University of California system, but also just the technology that comes out of Silicon Valley and even in my home district in Sacramento County. So thank you for allowing me to say a few words and help kick off the Technology Summit. Let's go out there. Let's imagine the future that we want to live in, and then let's go invent it. Thank you again. Be well, be safe, and let's be kind to one another.
All right. Thanks to Congressman Bera for those great remarks. Let's get to the main show. I want to introduce the three esteemed panelists we have now. First, starting with Clara Liang, who is a senior VP at Airbnb and who has a rich history as a product leader at Airbnb for many years and oversees an international team that supports both guests and hosts in over 200 countries, and even helped on the Olympics, which is pretty exciting, and I want to learn more about it at some point. Prior to that, she led the luxury business, also as a VP and general manager, and has piloted the acquisitions of Hotel Tonight, Urban Door, and Lucky. And so thank you for joining us, Clara. I also want to introduce Brian, who is my old colleague from the Obama White House, and he is now the head of product marketing at Robinhood, where he has been responsible for go-to-market strategies and connected product narratives. And before that, worked at Lyft on a portfolio of products, including the driver experience, and even at Airbnb, where he led the global product operations team focused on host success. At some point, we should ask Brian about his IPO success personally. This can be a question that you ask anyone in the audience. Tracy Lee is our final esteemed panelist, who is the director of public policy for the West Coast at Lyft, where she oversees the legislative, regulatory, and political strategy at the state, provincial, and local levels in California, including the CPUC in San Francisco, Hawaii, British Columbia, and everywhere else. Tracy represents Lyft in all interactions with electeds and government officials and staff like yourselves, including providing testimony in legislative and regulatory hearings and helping to formulate and advocate policies that support the growth of ride sharing, including mobility and work classification and a lot of other stuff. So as you can tell, we have three very experienced, very successful panelists and one goofy moderator in a t-shirt. And we're going to get started. And the first question I wanted to ask you all is, all of your companies, Lyft and Airbnb and Robinhood, started as insurgents, scrappy companies fighting dominant entrenched players. And now some of you find market caps that are larger than all of those incumbents combined in some cases. And I'm just curious to hear from all of you, and maybe we can start with you, Claire, about what that transition has been like to go from insurgent to a larger, more established player, and what parts of the DNA you keep and what parts of the DNA have changed.
Thank you for the question, and I'm so glad to be here today. As I think about Airbnb at our core, we are a company about entrepreneurship and innovation to actually facilitate democratizing travel, but more importantly, connection and belonging. And so we're not just about helping hosts and helping them leverage their greatest assets in order to be able to host on Airbnb. It's also about building a really great travel community and being able to make travel more authentic and real all around the world. And so as I start to think about our core, if belonging and inclusion is at our core, I think, first of all, making sure we're innovative, we're adaptable. The pandemic over the last 18 months has been a great lesson in focusing on, being serial entrepreneurs. That's actually one of our core values as a company. Serial, meaning like breakfast cereals. There's a story from early Airbnb days where our founders actually sold cereal boxes during the 2008 election in order to continue to pay their bills. And so that's one of our core values is innovation, and we call it serial entrepreneurship. Being adaptable, being innovative, being resilient, being creative, listening to our community. That's very much at our core and very much about how we've built the community to date in partnership with our hosts who have given us their feedback, who have told us what they need, and so that we can provide the tools quickly for their success. And then also for our guests, right? Travel patterns are changing. We know what last year's really taught us is we can't predict the future. And so being ready to adapt as to where our guests are, meeting their needs, and then being innovative to delivering tools for hosts. I think that's really in our DNA, and that's something we absolutely want to take forward. And then I think as we think about the future, it is making sure that this travel revolution that we're in, right? We know travel won't be the same as it was. How do we ensure that it is as inclusive as possible as we evolve to this next phase? And so as you think about travel shifting from, major cities to more rural destinations, and 4,000 cities around the world had their first Airbnb check-in ever since the start of the pandemic. It's just thinking about how do we make it the most inclusive experience ever, so that anywhere there's a host that wants to host and anywhere there's a guest that wants to be, we have an opportunity to help give everyone an equal opportunity to that. And I think at the end of the day, that's where our commitments will continue to lean in. It's about our community commitment that we've said, making sure anyone, regardless of age, race, national origin, ethnicity, disability, sex, orientation, gender identity, can belong. We have to continue to do work there and make sure that our community and how we build it's never done. And so we'll continue to lean in there.
There's a thread there on that I heard that I want to share with you, Brian. It seems like Robinhood has really democratized access as well to retail investors to be able to participate in a growing equity sort of market. Can you talk a little bit about the roots of Robinhood as this sort of scrappy underdog that allowed retail traders to participate in a market, and how it may have transitioned now that you're a large entrenched player in the market?
Yeah, I mean, as you said it, Robinhood is really focused on democratizing finance for everyone. And so I think, as you think about Airbnb, Lyft, and Robinhood, they're all really mission-driven companies. And because of those missions, we're really focused on ensuring that there's, a radical customer focus. And that's something that we'll continue to keep, to the point of, when Robinhood started, and even me buying my first stock on Robinhood 6 years ago, it was really because they had pioneered things like zero fee commissions and no minimum investing, which really, was revolutionary in that time. Now you've seen all of the other kind of big players out there follow along. That's same with fractional shares and recurring investments, things that really help customers invest for the long term. And again, because we focused on the customer in even those early days until this day, you see a lot of the other bigger players following along as well. And so I think, to the point of how what we'll continue to take forward with us is a really, really radical customer focus, ensuring that we're mindful of the needs of this new retail investor that hasn't invested before, and being able to do that with our products and the products that we continue to build to ensure that we're being inclusive of that new retail investor generation is going to be important. But also, as we look forward in thinking about how we'll continue to build for what's next, there's other principles that we think about in too, which is, safety first, which is just building products that are mindful of new retail investors that really want to learn. And so building education products to really help people understand investing, launching things like 24/7 support, which we recently did, again, in mindfulness of this new generation of retail investors. And so with that, I think a lot of it is, again, keeping that radical customer focus, but also thinking about safety first as we build new products.
Thanks, Brian. Tracy, you are still in a scrap with a larger incumbent in Uber, and Lyft I've always sort of identified with as the scrappy, more fun-loving pink mustache company. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of Lyft from two people in a garage to where you grow now, and what parts of your DNA do you see as a sort of longitudinal throughput in everything that you guys do?
Yeah, happy to chat about that. So our co-founders, founded the company with the mission to increase or improve transportation access for individuals who might not otherwise have access to private vehicles or the bus, or they're within walking distance of a train station. We scaled greatly over the past couple of years, and we've been able to do that because we are driver and rider focused. We are solely focused on the customer and the community. We have a huge driver base, a huge rider base, and what we do is we really tap into the voices of the drivers and the riders to ensure that the services that we're providing, that the platform, the way the platform works is really adhering to the needs of the communities, whether it's a driver who's looking for an extra income earning opportunity or a rider who needs to get to work because their bus lines stopped running in the middle of the pandemic. One of the other, I think, parts of our identity that we've continued to carry through is the ability to stay flexible and stay nimble. A lot of companies, I think, during the midst of the pandemic had difficulty transitioning, figuring out, okay, what is my role in this space? And in order to do that, we had to think creatively. I think an example of that is, Lyft is a transportation company, or we provide transportation access to individuals. We are not a food delivery company, but during the middle of the pandemic, we quickly saw that ridership was going down. People weren't leaving bars or going out to see movies anymore. People needed ways to get to work. The bus lines stopped running. Public transportation was severely limited. And all of a sudden, you have this huge population of individuals who aren't able to get where they need to go. So we immediately transitioned from being just a transportation company to being part of critical infrastructure, to being an essential transportation provider. So we were able to think creatively. We were able to scrappily put together a food delivery program in some of our markets across the country, and we started having drivers deliver food. The drivers who lost their otherwise stable jobs in the pandemic now had the extra income earning opportunity of delivering food. So I think staying customer and community focused, staying flexible, and remembering to remain creative during all of this is something that Lyft is going to continue to do probably over the next couple of years. In terms of parts of identity that could evolve and that we're continuing to work on always, is we've always been a leader on social and racial justice issues and really making a difference not only outside of the workplace but inside of the workplace. And since racial justice issues have exploded, since the pandemic, we continue to be at the front lines locally, publicly, and vocally. And so remembering that our values should reflect, the people that we're trying to serve is something that we'll continue working on.
I really admired the position you all took in Texas, and I'm sure that it was thanks in no small part to you and Jeremy Bird and other people I admire there.
Yeah, well, we have a great team.
I'd love to stick with you and bring in Claire on the next question. It does feel like community is an increasingly important piece of your success. You are focused not just on the customer, but on the host. You are focused not just on the rider, but on the driver. And I've noticed that building and enriching an active digital online community is sometimes accretive to the bottom lines of your companies. And I think of that in a political context where our civics have not migrated anywhere nearly as efficiently from offline to online. People are not answering their doors anymore for canvassers. People aren't showing up to PTA meetings. And yet it does feel like we haven't built rich, engaged online communities that can drive to outcomes. And I'm curious, Brian, you've served in all three of these companies, it seems. Clara, you're running an important piece of Airbnb. Tracy, you're focused on Lyft. Can you share a little bit about what are the best lessons in building online community in your businesses, and what would you share with congressional staffers that are listening for lessons they can take back to their home districts? And why don't we start with you, Clara?
So I think it's such a good point. And an incredible power of these online platforms is that it actually makes it easier for you to connect with people that you may not otherwise have found. You can find people on the other side of the country or even on the other side of the world, and someone that might share your interests or your passions. Maybe it's a hobby, maybe it's a cause that you really care about, to be able to find them and connect. I talked a little bit earlier about Airbnb's mission being about connection and belonging, but especially in a moment where humanity needs that most, we need that connection more than most. What we've learned is that our belonging and that sense of belonging is made possible by hosts. It's the experiences that our hosts offer to guests that actually let them feel like they can belong. And if you even think back to our founding story, right? It's Brian and Dro, they're trying to make rent, and it's two guys welcoming, or two hosts welcoming 3 guests to their home, and they offered them an airbed and breakfast. And during that stay, what happened was more than a stay. They became friends. They hung out, they got to know each other. And from that, an idea was born. And at that time, as they were trying to build a company around this, a lot of people thought they were crazy. Why would you ever trust a stranger in somebody's home? And so the founders have put trust as one of the most critical elements to Airbnb, built that into everything we do, to then create an environment where people can feel comfortable and really connect authentically. And so I think if you start from the founding story and then you take learnings from more than 1 billion guest arrivals since, what this is really about is hosts and guests can connect online, but then they actually meet in the real world, and then connection and friendship grows from there. To me, community and relationships, they're not just online and they're not just offline. It's really about an enduring relationship with people and thinking about that authentic connection all the way through the relationship. And so if you go actually beyond just guests and hosts, you even think about just our host community with each other. Today, we've actually formed over 300 host clubs all around the world. These are hosts who want to meet other hosts in their local area. They gather in person. They also have online communities. And while they first started by sharing best practices and advice, it's actually just become a gathering of like-minded people. And sometimes they meet about Airbnb, and sometimes they talk about topics outside Airbnb. We recently had some hosts in Cape Town who got together to talk about their drought-like environment and their conditions and how they can actually band together to help the water scarcity they're experiencing. And so I think community ultimately is about focusing on what unites us together, bringing people together and connecting in both the online and offline worlds to be able to build an enduring relationship.
One of the other sort of pieces of this I find very interesting is like this exogenous driver of loneliness and social isolation as it relates to community. Tracy, can you talk a little bit about, it seems like the Lyft driver community is getting a piece of freedom in being able to operate when and how they want, and being able to augment income sometimes. Can you talk a little bit about sort of both those two things? I'm curious about how you've built community most effectively at Lyft, and also whether you see loneliness and social isolation as a sort of, actually, I want to ask that question. I don't even know what I'm asking that question. Tell me a little about how you've seen Lyft drive community well amongst drivers, and what's worked and what hasn't.
Sure. I'll talk about California since that's where I live and that's where I'm based. So 95% of our drivers in California who drive on the Lyft platform are students, or they work in addition to driving. And 94% of our drivers drive fewer than 20 hours per week. So these are the drivers that give the majority of rides on the Lyft platform. And rideshare has proven to be a lifeline for many people during the pandemic as traditional jobs have dried up. In fact, I think about 23% of California drivers with Lyft said that they drove more during the pandemic because they were laid off, they were furloughed, or they had their hours or pay cut due to the pandemic. So something we thought about was, how do you adhere and cater to the needs of drivers while navigating a pandemic, various policy battles, and then also, trying to keep the business afloat. So COVID has really forced us to rethink our approach to engaging with the driver community, but then also meeting them where they are in terms of, their needs, what they want, how they can be best served during COVID-19, and how they can still maintain their flexibility and independence. And so I think it's a matter of creatively elevating the voices of those who are impacted or will benefit from the politics or, whatever legislation's at play. It's been really critical for us to ensure that drivers' voices are at the forefront of the conversation. In terms of tactics, we've implemented a story collection campaign that helps solicit, I guess, for lack of a better word, selfie videos from drivers that we're able to share. So, for example, we'll ask them questions like, what has it been to be a driver during the pandemic? What is it like to now be able to receive healthcare for the first time? Why is remaining independent important to you, and why is your flexibility important to you? And then we've taken these stories and we posted them on our Lyft drivers stories page so that other people, members of the public, other drivers and riders can see how these real life drivers are being impacted and the benefit that rideshare provides. I think lastly, we've had some programmatic changes that have helped proven to migrate our in-person engagement. So, for example, I think I mentioned earlier, we helped create earnings opportunities for drivers during the pandemic by launching an offline meal delivery program where meals were delivered to homebound seniors. We really invest in driver pathways to help them figure out how they can start owning electric vehicles, so transitioning away from gas-powered vehicles to electric vehicles, focusing a lot of our sustainability initiatives on electric vehicles, and then helping drivers with their financial literacy. And then finally, creating a space simply just to listen to drivers so that they're able to tell us what their experiences have been. Similar to what Airbnb mentioned, we have a driver advisory council. And that driver advisory council is a diverse group of drivers who basically serve as a link between Lyft and the driver community nationwide. So the driver advisory council members, they test new product features, they weigh in on programs and policies that impact drivers. They have community meetups, and they will give us feedback on things like our social impact work and in-app navigation, or the AMP that you might see in a driver's vehicle. So really focusing in on the driver's needs and then being creative about how to elevate their voices online. Sometimes it's as simple as having them take a selfie video and then us just, posting it on a website.
That's great. Brian, I'm going to go off piste with you with one question that I'm curious about. I observe in Robinhood the ability to migrate these fairly complex trading strategies to retail investors in a very intuitive, easy way. And I think it's been wonderful, the ability to democratize these tools and invite people that traditionally weren't able to access, these capital markets, be able to participate in wealth generating opportunities. When I think about underserved communities in a political context, I don't see the same opportunity to migrate people that are underserved by their state, local, or federal governments to access benefits they otherwise qualify for. What are the sort of lessons that you would give people that are interested in building civic technology or that are buying technology for governments to be able to invite underserved communities in? What are some of the lessons you've learned in your technology life that you would sort of bring home to this sort of government and political audience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of it is, I'll take it in two parts. I think one way that I kind of like to think about this and is how both Airbnb and Lyft have built up communities. In some way, one of the most compelling things about both of those platforms is the ability to tell stories and to share stories of drivers or hosts or riders and guests. And it's a really amazing opportunity for us to kind of hear those stories throughout the company's growth. I think similarly, you'll see Robinhood continue to tell stories of its customers, because that's how we actually help everyone, find that common thread, whether it's in wanting to build a better future for yourself, whether it's finding a new ways to finding new opportunities. And I really think that in some way, there's a lot of work to be done ahead of us, both in the civic space as well as in the private sector, to start telling stories of customers and real people, right? And I think that's another way in which we invite that conversation in, is that whether, I remember my days as an organizer, knocking on doors and sharing my own story and hearing stories of others. And that is a very powerful tool that, I certainly continue to keep top of mind today. I think on the second point I'll make is a bit of understanding how technologies need to be intuitive, how they need to be designed well, how they need to be thoughtful, and again, have that radical customer focus. And I think both with Lyft and Airbnb and Robinhood, you'll see that similar design principles in which you want to make things easy and accessible in a way that is important for that particular customer, right? So, whether it's investors, retail investors, whether it's drivers, hosts, riders, and guests, there is always an opportunity to make technology more accessible by making it more intuitive and something that people can easily use. And I think part of it is, as we develop technologies, whether in the civic space or elsewhere, it's important to keep those design principles in mind. And it's really something that I know very much that I've seen in these platforms and other technology companies.
That's great. Clara, I'd love to ask you a question about just general advice you'd have for this young, engaged audience as they consider the rest of their careers. You've been to Stanford, you have a master's from the University of Texas, you've worked at these incredible companies. What advice would you give the young staff that are listening? And maybe you're not all young, but what career advice would you give them as you kind of reflect on your success? How would you, if somebody is listening that wants to break into tech, that works on Capitol Hill today, what advice would you have for them?
I think it's really important to focus on what you're absolutely passionate about and the impact that you can actually have on yourself, on the world around you, and much more importantly, in society at large. I think actually in business, there's an emerging focus where business is much more than serving your shareholders. It's actually about serving all stakeholders. And I think if you've been, in the government and serving our communities, that is an incredible advantage, an incredible understanding of what your constituents and your local audiences need. And to bring that sense and that, I'll call it end user or customer focus, to companies, to actually help companies continue to be stronger and stronger members of society. I think these rules of business have changed. At Airbnb, we talk about being a 21st century company. We have 21st century principles and 21st century stakeholders. Like a publicly traded company, we do have shareholders, but we also have stakeholders that are equally important to us. There's our hosts, our guests, the employees that work for us, and also the local communities where we operate. And I think really taking that holistic view of it, it's not one stakeholder has to win for another stakeholder has to lose, but you really look for the opportunity where that rising tide raises all boats, if you will, and we can actually win together. I think that's really important. It's something that makes me proud to work for Airbnb. I think it's something that, frankly, consumers want to see from businesses in the future. And I think the businesses that will be most successful over the coming decades are the ones that users, our communities, everyday people want to see successful in their communities because of the impact they're having. And so at the end of the day, I think it's about finding what is that mission you're passionate about? How do you bring that expertise and that insight that you've developed from this incredible experience working as you do today, and then bring all that knowledge to help each company, help the company you want to work for be better, stronger, richer, more connected in understanding the constituents that we serve. I think that is going to be a critical transformation point and help us build much better companies that all of us want to continue working for.
That's great. Thanks, Clara. Hey, we have an audience question, which is a good prompt also if you're in the audience to fire in more questions. The question is for Brian and Clara. And the question is this: Airbnb has created a groundswell of companies who are building off the Airbnb model, but targeting different markets. What's Airbnb's approach to this competition in the marketplace? Why don't we start with you, Brian? Although you don't work at Airbnb anymore. So I'm
going to defer this back to Clara. Frankly, as I was at Airbnb, but I think she's probably the best one to take that question.
I think at the core, we're an innovative company that loves to see, new opportunity in the world. And we're on a mission to democratize travel and to change the way that anyone can become an entrepreneur. So I think supporting entrepreneurship, helping people build businesses. I mean, I would say the Airbnb platform every single day actually helps create entrepreneurs and help everyday individuals become, small businesses and become hospitality businesses. So I think from a pure inspiration, belief that democratizing the opportunity to participate in this economy and that everyone should have a shot regardless of where they live and what else they do to be able to take advantage of this, for us, revolution in travel, that's really, really core. And so that inspiration of helping entrepreneurs, if it inspires others to create an incredibly rich ecosystem of offerings that also benefits, hosts and guests and helps people feel inspired about new ways to travel that are more authentic, more locally inspired, more real, and actually help guests truly experience what it's like to be part of a community. That is all wonderfulness. And I think Airbnb is very excited to support anyone who wants to build a business as part of this future of travel.
Thank you. Tracy, I want to come back to you on your personal story. I hadn't appreciated that you were a criminal prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. You were assistant DA in San Francisco and have this sort of rich public service track record before you came to the private side. What can you share about that transition? How did it go for you? What advice would you have for people that are listening?
Yeah, happy to chat about that. It was a very unexpected transition for me. I think I was at the time, had fully focused on being a prosecutor, and I thought I was going to stay in public service for the entirety of my career, and ended up getting this very random opportunity at Lyft at the time. I think it was in 2018. And I kind of made the transition. I kind of took a leap of faith. I'd never really worked in policy before. I always followed local politics. I'm born and raised in San Francisco. It's where I am now. And so always followed it at the local level. And the opportunity came about, and I figured, I live in San Francisco. I've been working in government this whole time. Government moves very, very slowly at a snail's pace, and I see tech all around me, and it's changing the world. And I use it. I use Lyft, and thought, hey, it might be kind of exciting to be part of this, to affect change and to help change policies that impact the community, that impact technology. So I did that full well knowing that, I was leaving my formal legal career behind, but also feeling comfort in the fact that I knew I was going to be able to use my advocacy skills. I was a trial attorney. So, I love getting up in the courtroom every day and talking to jurors and talking to judges and talking to attorneys and advocating for the people of the state of California. And so I do that still, but in a little bit of a different forum. I'm talking to legislators, electeds, people in City Hall, people at the state capitol. So still really exciting. I still use my skill set. One really big difference for me when I moved from government to tech is in government, I was used to doing everything on my own because we were so under-resourced. So if I'm talking about my life as a trial attorney, I would pick a jury on my own. I would conduct a trial on my own. I would do opening statement, closing argument. And now that I work in tech, if I were to liken the work that I do testifying at hearings currently, now I work at a tech company that's much more resourced than working in government. So there are people to help with all those things and teams to help with all those things. So that transition was actually very difficult for me, learning to kind of let go a little bit and realizing that, hey, I don't have to do this all by myself. We have an entire team of amazingly talented people who are frankly probably much better than I am at many of these things, and they're willing to help me, and learning to balance and navigate that process. But I'm so grateful to be at Lyft, and the team I'm working on is incredible. So many talented individuals that I think Brian's worked with a lot of them. But yeah, that's my story.
Great.
An unconventional path because I never worked, on a campaign or in politics previously.
Brian, I'd like to go off piece with you one more time, if it's okay. I've been thinking a lot about how quickly technology and private markets can move. And it just still sticks with me today when a senator asked Zuckerberg, if Facebook is free, how do you make money? And I'm curious for the staff that want to stay abreast of technology. understand new innovation in fintech or in distributed finance or things like this, how would you recommend they structure that learning? How can they stay as fast as markets move? Where did you structure your learning?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, to be, clear, like the financial industry is a highly regulated industry, and one in which, you work very closely with your regulators to, navigate a very complex and ever-changing regulatory landscape. And I think part of it really comes down to just continue to engage, right? A lot of us are users of, these different platforms, and part of it is participation is power in learning how these apps work and how how one may navigate through them. But if you're looking to learn more, I think part of it's just doing a lot of things, right? There's the opportunity to reach out directly to colleagues and to folks within each of our companies that we work with to understand what that company may do and how it may work. And I think part of it is that open dialogue is an important part of staying engaged. I think another part of it is just trying to find ways to understand not only how the company may work, but also how customers are working and how customers are experiencing products, right? If you think about how Robinhood has grown over time, frankly, it's because we're launching products that just the industry hadn't seen, right? Whether it's no commissions or account minimums, and even in crypto, right? And I think with those things that are continuing to have shifting regulatory markets, it just really requires everyone to talk more and to learn more, but also know that the industry is continuing to be dynamic. And so in any way, I think part of it is having an open communication, both from the perspective of folks that have interests or from the companies themselves and customers as well. And that's just something I know that all of us will continue to do as things change.
I wanted to shift to just the most depressing topic of all time, which is COVID, but it does seem like all three of your companies, and I'll start with you, Clara, had these like sort of holy shit, Brian Chesky has famously broken down in tears addressing really hard news to employees he loves dearly. And I'm just curious to hear you talk about your personal experience in what was your holy shit moment in COVID, as it relates to your work in Airbnb. How did you overcome those? It seems like you had to be pretty adaptable and resilient at some times where no one's traveling and all of a sudden, revenue looks like it could be zero for a quarter. Can you walk us through that story as it relates to you?
So you're exactly right. 2020, frankly, was quite a year. And to your point, we're a global travel company that's about bringing people together from all over the world in the midst of a global pandemic. It wasn't just a moment. I think it was multiple weeks, months of making sure that our community was safe and that our community and our company would be okay. And you would expect our business to take a big hit, and Brian has talked a lot about that, and ours certainly did. I think I'd come back to the core of our values, right? What that core value of being a serial entrepreneur that I talked about. It means you're adaptable. It means you're innovative. It means you're scrappy. And when the chips are down, we still, get up and see what the next thing we can do together is. So that's exactly what we did. We got to work. We worked harder than ever and kind of got back to our roots to think about what is it that our community really needed and how could we leverage the platform and the power of what we actually had, super skills in as a company in order to steer through this moment. We're a design company. We are about leveraging creativity and understanding our users and designing for our users, in this case, our community. And we focused on that. We did guest listening sessions. We did host workshops to hear what was going on. And then we just quickly turned around project after project after project based on what we heard was happening in the world so we could adapt. A couple examples of this. One of the first I'm most proud of actually is Frontline Stays. This was right at the beginning of the pandemic when we were finding all these healthcare workers were taking care of these patients in hospitals and then going home to their families and potentially being worried about bringing COVID back to their families. And so our host community opened their homes and gave places to stay for first responders near hospitals so they didn't have to travel as far. And were actually able to be, safely isolated away from their families while they took care of all of us in their local community. And that was a project that, was inspired by our hosts. It started from a small team actually in Italy that tried it. And suddenly it was something we were able to offer to our hosts and first responders all around the world. it was in a matter of weeks that we had over 100,000 hosts open their homes and offer for first responders to stay with them. And to watch our team, I was part of these meetings. They were, 3 times a day, stand-ups and check-ins, seeing what's the progress, what are the blockers, how can we continue to enable more hosts to open their homes this way, and for first responders to actually come and stay with them. In that moment in time, that was us taking the power of the Airbnb platform, which is helping people find really great places to stay and be hosted, for someone to take care of them, and actually use it in a moment in time where it's critical. And I think part of what's fueled me through this process is doing that over and over, hearing what our hosts need. We're noticing, a more flexible way of living, and people are staying longer than ever. And so launching our monthly stays product to help our hosts and guests find places to stay for a month or more. Online experiences was another example. We had this incredible experiences community, which was about bringing people together in real life. And then the pandemic hit and you couldn't gather in real life. And so pivoting to allow our hosts to actually offer those experiences online. It's a portal to another world. It's still a way to connect, still a way for our hosts to continue to earn an income, especially when so many people actually had a reduction in income in the rest of their lives through the pandemic. Those are just some examples, I think, of how we as Airbnb and myself as a product builder like to throw ourselves into the situation when everything around us is changing on a dime. And, I think at the end of the day, it goes back to, being, and it's been mentioned multiple times today, being really in tune with your community, understanding not just from data, but what your hosts, your guests are telling you, making sure that you're adapting quickly and building, solutions and technologies and tools to actually meet those needs, and then keeping your eyes and ears open, because the future will continue to change. Guest preferences will change, even beyond this pandemic. Guest preferences will change, regulations will change, industries will change, and so being able to, stay connected and build quickly, that's a lesson I'm taking away out of this as well.
Well, I must say, I greatly admire all 3 of your companies, and I think the thing I admire most is unapologetically taking a stand on issues that you and the company and the founders care about, whether it's a woman's right to choose, whether it's voting rights. I've seen a lot of unbelievable leadership, in particular out of Lyft and out of Airbnb, and really appreciate all 3 of you joining, appreciate the important work you're doing. And it was a delight to be able to chat with you and learn from you. And thanks to our audience for tuning in.